Hey, Susan Ragsdale with Right Creations Group, and I am here with my friend Nicole, and we are going to explore more about sparks and passion and how you figure out your purpose. So here's a quote from Mark Twain. The two most important days in your life are the day you are born and the day you find out why. So we're going to look at Nicole's why, and I'm going to have her introduce herself fully, say a little bit about herself and where to find her.
All right, so my name is Nicole Givens Kurtz, and I am the publisher for Mocha Memoirs Press. It's a press that for the last 11 years has worked to amplify marginalized voices in speculative fiction. And you can find us at mochamemoirspress.com. I am also an educator, a former educator actually. I've taught 6th through college in English language arts for 18 years. So I recently hung up my educator's cloak, in terms of like working in public school, but I'm still very much an educator at heart. I still enjoy teaching and giving instruction and helping others, find their why, helping writers at Mocha achieve their dreams of becoming published authors. I am also a published author in my own rights, and so I'm still working in chasing my own why and making sure my own goals of being a published author and sharing my stories with the public continue.
So Nicole, for me, is very instrumental and inspirational on the book I'm working on right now, which is Great Group Leaders, because she helped turn a page in my head and help me get unstuck on and give a fresh look to activities. So that'll be something coming out in the future, not sure exactly when, but she helped shape my thinking and what ended up, I think, the book being much richer for that. So Nicole, let's talk about your love of writing. And do you remember a moment, a time, a person where you were there and you suddenly had this aha of like, oh, I really like writing?
So my mother was a writer, is a writer actually, and most of my early memories of spending time with my mom involved either laying in her bed while she's reading magazines, or reading stories to me, or her writing in a journal. And she, to this very day, we're from Knoxville, Tennessee, and that's the home of Alex Haley, the person who wrote Roots. And so for her, writing was a way of connecting to and telling stories. And Roots really is a series of stories of his ancestors. And so she, pretty much my entire adolescence and young adult life, was focused and loved writers. So she wrote all kinds of stories about me, about my sibling, about life where we lived at in our housing project. She was either reading or she was writing. And so for me, that was my environment. So I was always writing in crayons. Even before I could actually write, I would go to bed after the last TV show I watched and continue that story with those characters in my head until I fell asleep. Or I would get in the floor and play with my dolls and continue that story. So even before I could write words, I was still telling stories. And so when I actually started writing in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, actually in kindergarten, they were kind of amazed that I could read. When I got to kindergarten, I was already reading.
Yep.
And so that kind of freaked out my teacher. But we spent many afternoons at libraries, at public libraries, because we were very poor. And so between teachers and librarians, I became who I am. So shout out to teachers and librarians, man, because my mom was a teenage mom. Like she was 18. Like when she graduated high school, I was 4 months old. And so the idea that reading was important, she already had that, but where to get books, how to get print, make that environment print rich, that fell on, she asked, but also teachers were willing to reach out and help her with that. Here, these books we don't use anymore, you could take those home. And we had like old tossed out encyclopedias in our house that they were going to throw away, that the teacher thought, hey, Miss Stinson, here you go, right? And so my mom is probably the biggest influence on me as a writer and a reader. And so, but it was my ninth grade high school English teacher that made me go, wait, I can make money at this. She pulled me aside. It was ninth grade, high school English teacher. She said, Nicole, can you stay after class? I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I promise I did the reading. I just did really horrible on the quiz. Um, and she was like, there's this county-wide essay contest, and I think that you should enter. And she's like, you write a lot, you enjoy writing. She goes, you write pretty decently, you will do a couple of drafts and let's see where it goes. I think you should enter this. And I did, only because she believed that I could. Right. And so it wasn't something that I saw was like, oh yeah, I can do this. It was again a teacher who saw that in me and said, hey, I think you're capable of this. And I did it, and I won countywide.
Do you remember what the essay was on?
It was on teenage pregnancy.
Okay.
Which of course I'm intimately familiar, right? Because my mom's a teenage mom. But I got $100. I got my name in the paper. I still have that newspaper clippings. So it was then that I thought, wow, I created something and someone paid me for it. And then I think I won a couple of poetry contests where I was like called this. I had won a couple of local poetry contests that I was asked to read the poem and perform the poem at this like a garden ladies group. And I was literally the only person of color in the entire building. So it was really interesting. And that one was about like love or broken hearts or something that, angsty teenagers write about, but it had won. And again, I got paid for that. So it's like, here's something I really like to do. Here's something that I am not horrible at, and people will give me money for it. I think I found my career.
And isn't that a great feeling when you're like, I love to do this and people will pay it and it all
Well, and that's the thing that my parents were like, if you find, it's the old adage that if you find something you love to do, you won't work a single day. And my dad kept reiterating that you need to find something that you enjoy doing, right? That will pay you a living wage. So I went to college and my major was English, and but it was my mom was probably my biggest influencer, person who lit the match. She, to this day, she still writes stories about all the things that have happened or that continue to happen. If we have an adventure with my sons, she goes, I'm gonna go home and write that story. And she has hundreds of stories. She's also the person who does our ancestry for our family. And so she has all those oral ancient stories too. And so it's one of those things it was my mom, but closely followed by teachers.
So you mentioned that you were a teacher, and that was part of what we talked about when we first met. And part of
yes,
since you love of reading and sci-fi and fantasy and all of that, did you, after college, make a decision that you were going to try the teaching route, or did you try the writer's route first, or did you go, I'm going to teach? And I mean, because our pathways are all unique, and
yes.
for us to say, I'm going to be a writer and go straight to making a living off of writing. So,
oh man, yeah, I wish it was that linear. It was not. It was a series of dead ends and circling backs and so no. So when I graduated college, I had a bachelor's degree in rhetoric, which if rhetoric is not creative writing, it's completely the other opposite end. It's the ability to argue, basically, and take apart arguments, present arguments in a logical fashion, right? So it's a very dry, it's very dry writing.
yeah.
So
Grant writing, I did. It's just
it's really how to argue. And had I gone on to be a lawyer, it would have been fantastic. But I didn't. I worked for a cell phone company and got promoted and moved to Chicago and was a computer analyst, billing analyst for like 5 years. So, so I came to teaching late. I didn't come to teaching until 2001, and that was only because I was working in San Diego as a computing billing agent, and I had gotten married, and we had moved to a very small town in New Mexico because we were like sick of big city life. And that small town had 20,000 people, and it was surrounded on three sides by Native American reservation land. And so that was Gallup. And the only jobs they had, the two largest employers, were the school system and Walmart. And since I had a bachelor's degree in English, I was a probationary teacher for English 7th grade. And they walked me to my classroom and said, here's your room, here are your keys, let's know if you need anything. And they left. And I had never taught a day in my life. So what I did was I did that that's how I came to teaching. Like I came to teaching late. I was like in my like almost 30 when I came to teaching. So I was a late entry into the profession. However, I remember what my good teachers did. And those are the tactics that, I mean, I was taking courses, education courses in the evenings, but I remember what my teachers did that I loved. And it goes back to the relationships, right? And so those relationships with kids and making English alive and purposeful, that's what made my first year of teaching really great. My first 3 years of teaching were fantastic. I didn't have a rough teaching year until my 5th year. So by then I had my degree, so I supposedly knew what I was doing. But yeah, I came to teaching very late. But all through that time, I still wrote. And I still submitted, and I still got copies of Writer's Digest, and I still penned short stories, and I still entered contests, and I still entered essay contests, and I still evolved my craft. Like when I got feedback, or I still did the thing. I still read. And that's one of the things about being a writer. If you don't have time to read, you really don't have time to write, because those two things are so interwoven. You cannot have one without the other. And so to be able to tell a story, you have to see how it's done and how others have done that. And so you have to read to be able to see that and the different ways and the different techniques. So you have to read a lot to get that. So I still did those things, even though I had this. And it was nice for me to be able to do that because I was an English teacher, right? So I'm reading in class, right? They're literally paying me to read and to evaluate text and to break down characters. So I'm learning more about the craft of writing while I'm teaching about the craft of writing. And so that was fantastic. And I would go home and in my evening hours, try to become a better writer and still work on my own personal craft. So it was good. It worked out well.
I heard in some of that you were given some tips. So if a young person, or even if one of, a youth worker, educator, so adult or young person wants to consider writing as a career, I heard you saying, write, whether it's a journal, whatever it is, just get in the practice, write every day. And I heard you say, read, do lots of reading.
And read different things.
Yes.
That's the thing. Like I have had kids who they would only read anime and that's all they would read. Well, there's a certain kind of story. There are different genres, subgenres of anime, of course, but there's a certain method of that manga lends itself to that, say, a different short story does not. And so just read a lot, read everything. That's actually something my mom said when I was little, looking in a car. This is before people had cell phones and DVDs and cars, whatever. My mom, I was in the back of a station wagon because it's the 70s. And she would say, I'm like, I'm bored. And she'd be like, read all the billboards. Read every sign you come across. And I did. And so it actually helped me navigate. So I knew how to get places or how to get to places, because I'm like, no, I know where that is. That city is here and it's 200 miles from blah, 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 because I had to read all the signs. And that's just read everything, read everything, read everything.